I will readily confess that I spend way too much time correcting people on social media, especially the ones who post memes that attribute trite proverbs to Plato, Socrates, Aristotle, or other ancient Greek philosophers. People see a quote that somehow, I don't know, warms the cockles of their hearts, and they want to share it with others, but they want to make it seem more important. So they try to tie it to some 2,000-year-old philosopher who is generally recognized as being one of the great minds at the dawn of philosophy. I don't really think that Socrates, Plato, or Aristotle need me to defend their reputation, but sometimes it just seems like I need to explain to this generation that Plato doesn't actually give a damn about the cockles of your heart, and you should just stop lying about him. But I was surprised by a reversal of the norm with this meme that was shared that attributed the saying, "I was in darkness, but I took 3 steps and found myself in paradise. The first step was good thought, the second a good word, and the third a good deed." They tried to say that Friedrich Nietzsche wrote that. Now, that saying is not trite. In fact, I would list that on a very short list of some of the most profound pieces of wisdom teaching in the history of the world. It's just that Nietzsche not only didn't say it, but he also never really got out of the darkness into paradise. He did say that thoughts become deeds, but that is so obviously true that I doubt that it was original to Nietzsche. What I encounter daily is people trying to attribute a trite modern saying to an ancient philosopher, but in this case, someone tried to attribute an ancient piece of profound wisdom to a modern philosopher who never would have said this, and in fact might have said quite the opposite. So far as we know, this idea of good thoughts, good words, good deeds being the 3 elements of a good life, whether you're into rewards and punishments or not, how to have a good life comes about following this 3-step path. That comes from the ancient Persian prophet Zoroaster, who probably would have been a contemporary of Moses, presuming that either of them actually existed as a single person. But the idea is at least foundational to Zoroastrianism. It would be rather difficult to say if the 19th century philosopher, Friedrich Nietzsche, would have been willing to even discuss what it means to be a good person. He was concerned with what he called the ubermensch, or Superman. Nietzsche lived in a time when the Christian religion was losing the social power that it had had in previous centuries in Europe, and a lot of people were happy to see it go, but mostly people just didn't pay much attention to it. They just became indifferent about it. For Nietzsche, the decline of Christianity was both a good thing and a dangerous thing. His Ubermensch was not a Superman like comic book Superman. He just believed that people should rise above the values of outdated religions and even outdated social norms. That to become the Ubermensch, we need to become the best version of ourselves, opening our minds and hearts to all that we could experience and become. Of course, one of the dangers of knowing just a little bit about philosophy is that you can misinterpret or overinterpret what a philosopher was trying to say. Many people take Nietzsche to be something of a selfish libertarian, and admittedly, there is a way to see that suggestion in his writing, especially if you're a 19-year-old college student who's already tired of living by their parents' rules. But he was not a precursor to Ayn Rand or Adolf Hitler, though both of them like to claim Nietzsche as their inspiration. Hitler and Rand really should have taken the next class in philosophy and dug a little deeper. Nietzsche was concerned with each of us charting our own path, becoming our best selves, which is admittedly a selfish concern, but he also warned against the chaos that would come from the collapse of Christian morality. He's often credited with having declared that God is dead, but it would be more accurate to say that Nietzsche actually said that society is living as if God was dead, living without a moral compass, a sense of personal responsibility, and some sense that what is good for me cannot cause great harm to others. I can't be an ubermensch in the sense that I'm entirely liberated to run over other people. Look, most of us would likely quickly agree that Mother Teresa was a good person and that Charles Manson was a bad person. And if you wanted to make a really bad grade in my introduction to philosophy class, you might even try to argue that Mother Teresa was the embodiment of Zoroaster's injunction to think good thoughts, say good words, and do good actions. And Charles Manson was the ultimate ubermensch because he certainly overcame religious and social inhibitions to live by his own lethal standards. But let's face it, not many of us are made of the kind of stuff where we even could live like Mother Teresa lived. And I hope that none of us have the potential of engaging in the kind of ritual cult murders associated with Charles Manson. We don't live at the extremes of either sainthood or demonic character, even if, in the most literal way, we all contain the potential to be either one. We tend to live more in the middle, with a certain amount of altruism, a certain amount of being empathetic and being good towards others, but at times also being very selfish and self-serving. Moral debate then comes down to that middle ground about how can I be a better person? How can I avoid the slip into the darkness of living an entirely self-centered life? Like Nietzsche's concern about his peers in the late 19th century, I'm going to tell you, I'm worried about my peers in the 21st century because it seems like, generally speaking, that we are losing an interest in being good people. I'm afraid that we no longer really value being people of character or striving to serve others. Listen, in November of 2016, I was in Belize scuba diving with my daughter and a couple of friends, and we went to bed on the night of the presidential election confident that there was no way that a man like Donald Trump could win the presidential election. We were all sure that his nomination was a one-off, a fluke, a national embarrassment. But we woke up to the grim reality that he had won. My daughter cried. My friends leaned in and drank every bit of liquor that we'd bought for the whole trip. And I sat in shock and in horror. But as the days went by and the reality of it all set in, I consoled myself with the conviction that no one like Donald Trump could survive in office for more than a few weeks. I convinced myself to be absolutely certain that his constant lying, his corrupt deals, and his immoral relationships would get him impeached, and he would be out of office by spring. That is the last time that I have allowed myself to believe in the fundamental goodness of Americans. Because over the following months and years, we saw what kind of person that Trump was, a man for whom cheating on his pregnant third wife with a porn star was quite literally among the least of his offenses, to the point that even evangelical Christians continue to say that there was nothing wrong with what he did, and that he is the president chosen by God for our time. The same people who wanted to run Bill Clinton out of office for an extramarital affair in the early 1990s seem to have become completely immune to moral outrage just 25 years later. The Washington Post actually kept a daily counter of how many public lies that Trump told. By the time his presidency ended, their counter was over 30,000. That's 21 a day. Honestly, I don't know how they kept up. It would be like trying to keep count of how many people John Wick can shoot in a 3-hour-long movie. But for both Trump and Wick, I can tell you, it's more than your fingers and toes. And the religious right and many people in the Republican Party, after seeing all of the corruption, the emoluments, the misogyny, the racism, the tens of thousands of lies, they just didn't care. And Lindsey Graham still wants us all to send our money to this pretend billionaire for his legal defense fund. I don't want to waste any more time talking about Trump, but I mention him here to illustrate what kind of culture that his presidency opened the door to. All 3 Supreme Court justices appointed by Trump in their Senate hearings referred to the nearly 50-year-old Roe v. Wade court decision that made access to abortion legal in the United States. They all called it settled law, that it was stare decisis, a precedent of the court. In fact, the 48-year-old slender, ardent Catholic, Amy Coney Barrett, said in her 2020 Senate hearing that Roe was one of those cases that are so well settled that no political actors and no people seriously push for it being overruled. Lying is now acceptable for a good Catholic? If lying helps her to impose her personal religious convictions on the 80% of us who do not agree with her. Not a single Catholic priest, not a single bishop or cardinal has even mentioned that fact on this crucial issue, that Barrett stood before the Senate and lied like a cheap rug. Now, I think it's disgusting, but the church seems to think that this kind of dishonesty is worthy of praise. It appears that Nietzsche was right. We are living as if God is dead, especially, may I say it, the Roman Catholic Church. Please forgive me if I'm just clearly disappointed about this. I get that religious people are going to passionately disagree about many of the moral decisions to be made in our society. I understand that Mormons are opposed to smoking and drinking alcohol, and they don't even drink caffeine. But Mormons are not trying to make it illegal for me to have a cigar with a Red Bull with vodka for breakfast. Now, I should hasten to say that I've never had a cigar and a Red Bull with vodka for breakfast, but should I be struck with the urge, Mitt Romney is not going to send the police to my kitchen to stop me. But when it comes to a woman making her own decisions about her own reproductive health, good Catholics, good evangelical Christians do want to send the police to your bedroom to stop that. And since that is a decision that would have to come from the Supreme Court, prospective justices have felt that it was totally within their rights to lie about it in order to be put in a position that casts the vote to change the world. They have every right to disagree with me about whether the embryo in a woman's womb in the first month of pregnancy is already a person or if it is a potential person. But can't we agree on the basics that when we are deliberating about this topic, that we have to tell the truth? People have been all exercised about impeaching Clarence Thomas because he has accepted millions of dollars in gifts from right-wing Republicans who are clearly bestowing these gifts on Clarence and Jenny because they are advocating for their cases in court. And I agree, it is obvious corruption, and I do think that Thomas should become a footnote in law school classes for the rest of American history. But what about the justices that lied to the Senate during their confirmation hearings? Justices shouldn't just take $500,000 vacations on billionaires' yachts, But what about justices who lied about their upcoming votes in order to get a lifetime appointment to the court? When Justice Brett Kavanaugh voted to strike down Roe v. Wade after promising Republican Senator Susie Collins that he wouldn't, the only person in America who was surprised was Republican Senator Susie Collins. Perjury is so commonplace now that we typically don't even react to it. Seriously, why have Senate hearings at all if they can make up any answer they want to give just on the spur of the moment and never be held responsible for their perjury? Michael Cohen was sentenced to jail for lying to Congress just about paying off Stormy Daniels to stay quiet about her affair with Donald Trump. And really, when you think about it, who would admit that they had an affair with Donald Trump anyway? You wouldn't have to pay many people to be quiet about that. But what is that compared to taking away constitutional rights from millions of women, hundreds of millions? I have a modest proposal, folks. Let's make lying wrong again. Maybe you won't be seated on the Supreme Court if you tell the truth, but that should be a small price to pay compared to selling your soul to the devil by lying to get a job that you do not deserve. And I can't mention this topic without mentioning the 34-year-old newly elected member of Congress, George Santos. This guy's the same age as my daughter, and yet he claims on his resume to have graduated from Baruch College, worked for Goldman Sachs, worked for Citigroup, started an animal rescue charity, and even produced a Broadway play. The problem is that he didn't do any of those things. His entire resume was made up, and yet he thought that he should be able to get away with it, and even after being exposed, has refused to resign his seat in Congress, and his fellow Republicans have refused to demand that he be removed from office because, admit it, lying is just not considered to be a big deal in our culture anymore. And yet people still get mad at me when I tell them that I invented the iPhone and I wrote the music and lyrics to The Lion King, and my wife, Halle Berry, is so angry about it that she doesn't even want to be seen in public with me anymore. Seriously, I think that our society has become spiritually sick. We are not going to be an honest Abe, and we're not going to be a self-sacrificing monk. And you know me, I don't think that you should be weighed down with religious guilt. I think you should free yourselves from outdated religious standards and community prejudices. I just think that while you are rising up to become the best version of yourself, that you should also be striving to be a good person. While most of what you will read on the internet that is attributed to the 2nd century Stoic Marcus Aurelius is more likely to have come from Dr. Phil than Marcus Aurelius, but he actually did say, "That which is not good for the beehive cannot be good for the bee." And he said it in book 6 of his Meditations, saying number 54, if you need to check my reference, which is to say, we cannot do for our own gain that which also does harm to the rest of society. If we harm the hive, the bee doesn't survive. If we harm the community, ultimately it comes back to us. To accept selfishness, corruption, dishonesty in our individual lives only makes the whole hive sick. You do not have a good society unless it is made up of good individuals. We are in a time of what I think is gathering darkness, but thankfully, there is a way out of the darkness. 3 steps: good thoughts, good words, and good actions. So why don't we just do that?
Thank you for watching our videos. We are entirely dependent on the donations of our listeners and members. We hope that you find this content to be important enough to help us to keep offering these videos to the public at no charge by becoming a regular contributor. Please click on the donate button on our website at www.spfccc.org. Thank you for your support of progressive religious programming.